Today's video, I'm going to be replacing the engine on this '05 Civic. And the reason why, the coolant was getting overpressurized, and I did this combustion leak test where you put this fluid inside this little funnel and then you just run the engine and see if compression gas is getting pushed into the cooling system, which would change this blue into a green, and it did. So we know that combustion gas is getting bypassed through the head gasket. So we're gonna go ahead and replace it. I'm not going off of no set directions. I'm just gonna take off what I see would be in the way to remove the engine. You can go about it your own way. First thing I'm gonna do is just take off the battery, 10 millimeter. millimeter for this intake. One more down here that's missing. $10mm for this upper intake. One electrical connector. Squeeze, pull out. There's your upper box. Now the 2 throttle cables, we're going to go ahead and take those off. You're going to hold it open and bring slack on the cable. And on the left side right here, you're going to untension the cable, pull out the rod, and then there's one. And here's the second one. Here are your 2 throttle cables. Now there's 2 10s holding the bracket that hold the throttle cables. Now following the throttle cables down, 2 more brackets. Now here's your cables. We'll move these out of the way. This car, it was missing these front clips. It was just kind of tucked up in there. But on the wheel wells, there's 2 panel clips that hold it on each side. That's all that was holding on this under tray. So now with that out of the way, we can go ahead and drain our radiator. Now with that under tray out, we have access to our petcock to drain the radiator. So we'll go ahead and let that drain. We'll take off this ground. Lower radiator hose. There's another ground wire. Coolant sensor, press down, pull out. O2 sensor connector. Just press down and pull it out. We're just moving these out of the way just to make it simple. We're going to take off this heater hose line. I'm going to go ahead and just tuck this one out the way. Now we'll go ahead and take out the fuel line. Here's your fuel line. We'll move this one out the way. To move this engine harness out the way, we have to disconnect it from the alternator, and we'll be able to flip this away. It's also connected to the ignition coils. It's going to be hard to show on camera to remove it, but I'll show you how to just right down here in the front. Here's your power wire. on the alternator itself. This clip is facing towards the passenger side of the car. There's this big rubber protector on the top, so you want to pull that back, press down, and pull out. To help the harness come out, we're going to take off this AC bracket, 10 millimeter. Now we can go ahead and disconnect the ignition coils. This temp sensor, press down, pull up. Same thing on this connector. Pull up forward. Now we can go ahead and swing this out the way to the passenger side. Following this rear harness, which is connected to your injectors and your throttle body and all that. Following the tail end of things, there's 3 connections. You got one to your camshaft position sensor. The second one is your crankshaft position sensor. And the third one is right here, which I disconnected because I was just seeing if I can have access to it. One hand I went from the top, and the other one I went from the bottom. I used my right hand to press the clip, and my left one from the bottom to pull it out. Here's your crankshaft position sensor. The camshaft also has a protector on there. There is no room. It's right against this ABS manifold. So I'm going to have to do it off camera, but I'll show you where the clip is. And boom, there you go. All you got to do is press down on the camshaft sensor and then pull it out. So here are your 3 connections that go to the back of the engine. We can start disconnecting everything from the throttle body. These only kind of go back one way, but if you need to, you can mark just to make it easier when you're assembling. Take off this connector. Now I'll go ahead and take off the injector connectors. Squeeze on both ends, pull up. Now you can go ahead and swing it out the way. Pull it out. Now we got this tie down. And there's that last connector on the back side of the head. All you gotta do is just press down on that clip and pull up. These are the 2 that go in the back, and the last wire right here. Now your whole harness is disconnected. We're gonna take off this rear heater hose. In my situation, the AC system is not charged. Since it's not charged, I'm just gonna go ahead and disconnect it and move it out of the way. If your system is, you're gonna have to take it to a shop to have it discharged, and so they could recover the refrigerant. And so you can see, pressing on the little Schrader valve, there's no refrigerant in the system. So we're gonna go ahead and disconnect the line. Just remove the 2 lines from the compressor itself. 10 millimeter. Here's one line. So what I'm going to try to do is unbolt it and unbolt the reservoir and move this whole assembly off to the side like the AC line. For some reason this is really crooked. I think is when they installed it previously, they did not line it up correctly. Yeah, they bent this tensioner. Now we'll go ahead and loosen up the mount bolts. 13 millimeter for the mount bolt on top. Now with the tensioner off, we can get our belt off. Now we can go ahead and take off the nuts that hold the power steering on. Here's your power steering tensioner. You can see how it's bent. Alright, power steering's off the engine, and here's just a supply line to the reservoir. We're able to move it out of the way. Gonna go ahead and disconnect this connector that goes to the compressor. On the back of the intake manifold, we have a vacuum line that goes to the booster. From the exhaust manifold to this exhaust, it's 12 millimeters. Millimeter. $14 millimeter. $10 millimeter. $10 millimeter for this bracket. So now we have access to our torque converter bolts. You can go ahead and take off the spark plugs. This way you're not fighting compression when you're spinning the motor. 19 millimeter on the crank bolt, 10 millimeter. As long as it's not seized with the torque converter, it should spin freely. So you can see right there, they are separated. We're going to get situated with the engine hoist, and so we can start removing the mount bolts. Alright, now we're at the point. I got a jack on the oil pan supporting, just so when we remove the motor mount, it doesn't fall, and it'll give us a chance to put the hoist brackets on. And then once we put the hoist bracket on and support the motor, we could then remove the transmission to engine bolts. 17 millimeter for the bolts. Here's your bracket that holds the engine to the body. Alright, this is the driver's side. Now we're going to go mess with the passenger side. On the passenger side, I removed the two nuts that hold the CGR valve. So I have my two clips, added some washers, and the nuts back on. So that's the passenger side. Now you can see we got tension on the engine to lift it out. Now we'll get the transmission mount bolts. Using the replacement engine as a guide, on the forward end of the engine, you got 1, 2, 3, and on the rear end of the engine, you have 1 and then 2. So there's 5 mount bolts that hold the transmission to the engine.
Unlike the other 4, this 5th one is on the engine side, right above the axle. And I'm going to be getting to it from the top of the back end of that manifold. Hindsight, do that bottom one first. This way, when you put the car on the ground, you only have to mess with the ones up in the engine bay. Before I can set up the camera, after I removed that last bolt, I want to kind of put tension on the engine just to start lifting it up, and it's separated. So we're fully separated from the torque converter and the transmission. Now we'll go ahead and slowly lift up. Always go slow. Do a walk around, making sure nothing is connected that you forgot. At the time of this clip, I don't know what was the last thing you saw on a video. I accidentally pushed the camera instead of the video, but we're halfway out. And there you go, engine is out. And I'm pretty much gonna match how that one came out, and that's how that one's gonna go in. I do have to replace the oil pan because the JDM oil pan is different than the American spec oil pan. So I'm gonna do that off camera. If other than the oil pan, if I find anything else that's different, then I'll go ahead and swap it out. The engine mounts were slightly different. This stud on the JDM one was about half the height, so I went ahead and swapped the American one over. Is on the JDM one, there's a plug for this oil pressure sensor, so I took this one off the original motor and installed it. Another thing that I had to swap over was the American car has cruise control, so there's 2 cables, the one for the normal throttle pedal and then the cruise control cable. So that I took off everything from this side off and everything from this side off and just replace the throttle body. The American one has this little port for the evap system. The JDM one did not, so I just went ahead and swapped it. You just gotta undo the hoses and swap it over.